Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. It's good to be back. I spent 3 weeks in Switzerland, including 1 week with COVID. So I'm back, the shows are back, the inventory series continues, and I'll be in the office for the next couple of weeks before the holidays, getting us back up to speed, because I love sharing these watches with you guys. I should also mention, we can meet. If you're in New York on the 23rd, this coming 23rd of November, please email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. We have a limited number of guest slots for the grand opening of our New York Watchbox boutique. I'll be there, watches will be there, we're going to have lunch, snacks, and drinks for everybody. We only have a few slots though, so reach out to tmosso@thewatchbox.com if you're going to be in New York on the 23rd and you want to stop by and talk watches with me. Remember, everything on this show is for sale. Reach out to me at tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It is your one-stop shop for just about everything today. Buy, sell, or trade. We are still looking to build inventory for the holidays, and the more the merrier. We like trades. We like to buy watches outright. We pay cash. We pay fast. We make the process easy and seamless. So reach out to tmosso@thewatchbox.com for prices of these watches, or if you wish to buy, sell, trade, or meet me on the 23rd. So let's jump straight into the title card. This is the watch in the thumbnail, and I aim to please, guys. This is a Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch MOONPHASE, and it is a Speedmaster Professional, as from the late 80s, Omega oddly inducted a date and moonphase complication into the canon of the Speedmaster Professional collection. So we'll get a little bit closer here. You can see that the dial is a sort of off-white cream. This model came out in 1997. It was made through approximately 2000, 2001. It's 42 millimeters in steel, like a standard moon watch, sapphire crystal, but where it really starts the departure is the bezel, which is polished white gold. Now on the dial side, you can see it borrows some of the design language from the 1997 Speedmaster 57 replica, which was the unfortunate name of an actual Omega watch from the period, but this is not part of the Broad Arrow series. The dial is a lightly pebbly grain with blue polished metallic indices. We have matching blues for the hands themselves, and the watch is quite well loomed. No objections on that front. You can also see that the watch has a complication, coaxial moon phase and a pointer date, both of which are adjusted using pushers on the case flank. The watch has a span across the wrist of approximately 53 millimeters because of the solid end links of the bracelet, so it has a commanding wrist presence. A lot of folks don't think of a moon watch as an alternative to something like a Big Bang or an offshore, but it really is in terms of the way it wears. It's large today. It must have seemed huge back in 1969. Now internally, it's the same basic moonwatch movement, so you get that wonderful link to the NASA space program. This is caliber 1866. 1866 is the moonphase date version of the 1861, still based on the Lemania 1873 Bausch, manual wind, NASA flown, 48-hour power reserve, 21.6 beat rate, cam, lateral clutch, 18 joules. The change here, though, is there is that complication module on top, but it is that flown base. So this watch has a lot of history, heritage, but also upscale horological appeal to the connoisseur who wants a moon watch, who wants the Speedmaster Professional, but does not want the one everyone else has. All right. So from Moonwatch to Moonshot, let's talk about a model that is a unique interpretation of Grubel Force's 2012 Tourbillon 24 Secondes Contemporain. It is the contemporary version of the Tourbillon 24 Second, and this is quite easy. You could see the Tourbillon makes a circuit every 24 seconds. It's inclined at 25 degrees. It's making those 25-degree sweeps. It is remarkably dynamic and fast for a tourbillon regulator. Remember, the Brigade tourbillons often were 4-minute affairs, technically audacious for their time, but not visually spectacular. This is. You can even see that the watch has a multi-level stepped dial that allows you to see everything from the drive for the power reserve indicator to the stacked barrels on the movement below. We have a conventional seconds hand because this cannot act as the seconds hand. You can see that the balance bridge is entirely sapphire on its upper half, and then on its reverse side, you can see that there is a dramatic tri-spoke bridge with a golden chaton. This is an exclusive interpretation in platinum. This is effectively a Grubel Force piece unique, 43.5 millimeters in diameter. The hour track is also nestled on a bed of sapphire, and then the hands, as well as the indices, make this a surprising uber watch, as it's quite well loomed and easy to read at night. The power reserve, remarkably, for the energy-intensive complication is 72 hours. And on the reverse, we get this lovely chiaroscuro effect of light and dark. What I love here is not just that we have these frosted bridges in blackened German silver. It's not just that jewels are set pocket watch style in chaton, or that there's a glorious solarization on the lower mainspring barrel. It's really the fact that each one of these wheels has been internally chamfered, both its inner circumference and its spokes, meaning each sector of each wheel has 1, 2, 3, 4 individual interior angles. There are Geneva hallmark movements that do not have one. Now, the watch has a buckle to match. As you can see, it is a big and burly double deployant, and Greubel Forsey doing things the right way, giving you a platinum clasp on a platinum watch. Many high-end Greubel watches, including Tourbillon, do not have deployant clasps. Let's take a quick look. You can see the philosophy en français of Greubel Forsey on the side. That is how they make their watches. Nothing more, nothing less. Stephen Forsey is responsible for the technology side of these watches, and Robert Greubel tends to focus on the actual art design and aesthetics. The watch does fit on my wrist. I think you need a wrist of 16 centimeters or larger to wear it. That said, I would wear this happily. Big is the style with Greubel Forsey. They're not shrinking violets, and they're not designed to disappear under a cuff. A watch like this makes a statement. Yes, it says you're a connoisseur, but also that you are the boss. This is a corner office type watch. Okay, let's take a look at the polar opposite. You can also be the boss if you own this. Okay, guys, best guess? Did you think Piaget? Well, some folks have said, well, I wouldn't want to knock this watch against a doorknob or a door frame while I'm wearing it because it's so thin. And I say, well, when you wear this watch, people open doors for you. This, launched in 2014, the 140th anniversary of Piaget, is the Piaget Altiplano 900P. It is 3.65 millimeters thick by 38 millimeters in diameter in rose gold, and remarkably, it's a no-compromise watch. Lots of clever tricks are used to make it thin, but it has a 48-hour manual wind power reserve and a number of elements designed to make it more durable. So to make it thin, the base plate of the movement is one and the same as the case back. They are one piece built together. You can also see that the hands are actually recessed below the bridges, and the same is true of all the intermediate wheels of the winding system leading to the ratchet wheel. So what happens is, as you wear the watch and the sapphire, which is a fraction of a millimeter, flexes, it flexes and comes into contact with the bridges, not the wheels, not the hands. The timepiece beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and there's some elements here that make that possible, including a hanging barrel. It hangs only on one side, so having only single-sided pivot, it can be made thinner. You can see as I wind the watch, the ratchet wheel, the click, the intermediate wheels in action. Then I have skeletonized bridges that actually show me the drivetrain, so I can see the great wheel, the third wheel, the fourth wheel, and the escape wheel. And then I can see the escapement, and there's a beautifully hand-finished bridge specifically for the anchor. There's also a micrometric regulator for fine-tuning and a nickel anthracite track for reading the hours and the minutes. Let's throw it on my wrist. It's almost unbelievably compact. As you can see, this is a watch that could easily disappear. Being relatively narrow, just over 45 millimeters from lug to lug, a man can wear this, a woman can wear it. It is a unisex watch. Either one would enjoy this timepiece. And I've always felt that if a watch is ultra thin, it may also be best to design it in a traditional size. And while 38 is on the larger size by traditional standards, it's very much a compact and universal size by modern standards. Piaget of Côte-au-Fay makes beautiful watches, and since the original 9P ultra-thin manual of 1957, they have been specialists in ultra-thin watchmaking, and this watch, at the time it launched, was the world's thinnest serially produced mechanical watch. Very impressive. Now, I have another watch, which isn't necessarily a record breaker, but it is extraordinary given that this 6.6 millimeter thick Bulgari Octofanissimo S is 100 meters water resistant. 6.6 millimeters thick, screw down crown with a ceramic cabochon, and a case that's only 6.6 millimeters by 40 millimeters in design. This is a 2022 release that is a 50-piece limited edition exclusively for the United States market, celebrating half a century since the first Bulgari boutique opened in the US. Now, like the model in steel, you don't get the monotonous media blasted finish of the titanium versions. Here you have a combination of satin and polish, and it's not all the same satin. We have longitudinal satin, we have radial satin, and then on the side we have vertical satin. There's a lot going on. The facets are intriguing. The combination of polish and satin on the bracelet actually does a great job of articulating it and making it more interesting to look at. The watch has a dial that's best described as a brown bronze metallic sunburst, and then technically speaking on the reverse side, not much has changed technically with the BVL 138, though this is the latest post-2020 version of the movement. Platinum micro rotor, 60-hour power reserve. The movement is 36.6 millimeters in diameter, so very large to fit the case, but also only 2.23 millimeters thick, very thin to fit the case. And yes, 100-meter water-resistant watch. We'll throw it on my wrist, get a quick look at how it fits. Because it is not a wide watch. Lug to lug, it's only 46 millimeters. It wears surprisingly well on smaller wrists, and yes, it is viable for a woman. I think you could wear this watch on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference, easily beneath the cuff. This is the first use of yellow gold on an Octofanissimo S, so it's also a bit of a landmark for the series. You will not see a lot of these. 50 pieces, and then only sold in the US market. Fortunately, this one being recently pre-owned, we can send it anywhere. All right. Speaking of a watch that can go anywhere, this is probably the most versatile watch that Rolex makes. It's the Sky Dweller, but this is the post-2021 version. Quick Sky Dweller history. We got the original model in full gold in 2012. It was Rolex's first annual calendar and its first compound annual calendar GMT at the same time. We then got a version in steel with a white gold bezel for 2017. That's the same year this fully luminescent index dial arrived, and you can see here it is quite well loomed. But then, for 2021, we got the Jubilee bracelet, so named because it launched with the original date just in 1945, which was the 40th anniversary or Jubilee of Rolex. I've always thought that the 42mm Sky Dweller looked like a big date just, and now with this bracelet, the scale and the look are complete. So if you're a big guy and you like a date just, but you just can't reckon with something smaller than a 42. This is a 42 and a beefy 42. It's 52.2 millimeters from end link to end link, so it's got good wrist presence, but it's not overbearingly thick, nor is it oppressively massive. It has a solidity to it, but it doesn't feel bulky. The bracelet vents wonderfully, unlike the straps on the early Sky Dwellers or the Oyster bracelets later on, or for that matter, the Oyster Flex that arrived in 2020. This actually has enough integrity now with solid links to be a sports bracelet, but you can see how well it vents with many gaps between the Jubilee links. It fits superbly, it feels great, and it displaces heat nicely. Now, zooming in a little bit, you can see there's a lot to love here. Annual calendar display, so we have this aperture outboard of each hour. It's intuitive, 12 hours, 12 months, and then we have a date. Now, the way this works is the bezel is part of the movement. In the first position, the crown winds. In the second position, with the bezel justified all the way clockwise, nothing happens. One click counterclockwise. Now, I can adjust the date forward and backwards. And you can see that little red index jumps from month to month, so it is a bi-directional annual calendar. And again, with an annual, you'll need to make one adjustment per year during the jump from February to March. One more turn counterclockwise. Now, the watch is still ticking. I haven't hacked the seconds, but I can adjust the hour hand for local time. I can adjust the date forward this way, but not backwards. One more click counterclockwise. Now everything is synced up. Hacking seconds is active, and I can adjust that reference time zone, which is in a 24-hour format. Another change Rolex made was they decided that ring should always be the color of the dial to make it look less like a horse collar, and it looks a lot better like this. So you set your reference time, then you set your local time, then you set your calendar, then you lock it up, screw the crown down, 100 meters water-resistant chronometer, 3-day power reserve, 70 hours to be precise, highly shock-resistant and anti-magnetic. The Sky Dweller in steel with a white gold bezel has it all going on. We may as well go from Rolex to Rolex, but here's a Day Date as you've rarely seen it. This is the white gold 36 cherry metallic dial, and it is wonderful. A lot of unconventional features here for Day Date. First, not every Day Date is loomed. This one is fully loomed. Taking a quick look at the dial, it is that explosive cherry metallic sunburst with white gold hands, crown, and indices. Now, the next unusual element here is a white gold bezel that's domed. Generally, you see a domed bezel on a Rolex, it means you're looking at steel. It generally means you're looking at an Oyster Perpetual. So here, instead of fluted, we have a domed white gold bezel. Case, 100 meters water resistant. Here's another unconventional element. An oyster bracelet on a Day Date. Now, this is a Day Date 36. It does retain the iconic crown clasp. So the partition point between the two halves is still indicated by the presence of the crown, so it's still as seamless as it's ever been. But this is a very sporty looking Day Date on the wrist. It's a younger man's Day Date. It's a watch for someone who's not yet ready to retire. The Day Date traditionally has been the watch beloved of guys who live down in South Florida on their third wife and second hip, and this is just not for that guy. This is a watch for the young and the young at heart. It's got a lot of color. In my opinion, it's got the gravitas of a Day Date, but with the sense of fun of the Oyster Perpetuals in their new Stella colors. So this is a lot of fun to own. Double quick set, hacking seconds, chronometer, automatic, and very, very sporty with the water resistance, the lume, and the automatic winding. This one's in excellent shape. But if you think that your watch should also be a gadget, well, go gadget watch. And we've got it right here. This is part of a short-lived bifurcation of branding. Bulgari bought Gerald Genta in late 1999 from Hourglass Holdings of the Far East, which is a major retailer out there, but decided that it couldn't manage the Gerald Genta and Daniel Roth manufacturers out of Le Sentier, sold them to Bulgari, and for a decade, the Gerald Genta and the Daniel Roth brands continued. In 2010, Bulgari announced it was going to fold the two into Bulgari, so for a while, we had these co-branded Bulgari for Gerald Genta collection pieces. They were literally continuations of existing Gerald Genta watches, but they were co-branded Bulgari primary, Genta secondary. It lasted for about 2 years, 2010, 2011, and then the Genta name went away. So this is part of a family of watches, the Bi-Retro Octo, that first came out in 2004. Yes, the Octo shape long predates Fabrizio Buonamassa's ascent at Bulgari. He perfected it, but Genta created it. It's worth mentioning that Genta had octagonal case watches dating back to at least the 1980s. So this design, as you see it here, bowed in 2004. This co-branded model came out in 2010. It's 43 millimeters in diameter in steel. It's got a ceramic bezel, so it's nice and scratch resistant. It's also 100 meters water resistant, which means it's surprisingly sporty. The strap itself is vulcanized rubber, fully integrated and tiered with a nice attractive texture to it. It almost looks like a rubber version of the old Omega lobster tail bracelets. Now, the watch is broad and flat, so while it's not terribly thick, it is quite large across the wrist. I would wear this on a 16 centimeter circumference wrist, as you see here, but I think you need a wrist at least my size. That said, it will slip underneath the cuff. It's not excessively thick, and it's nicely counterbalanced by a substantial clasp. You can see the transition was well underway. By this point, the clasps had been rebranded Bulgari, but a lot of the quirkiness of the old Genta brand still seeped through, as we had the Genta logo on the back of the strap, and then we also have the case back of the watch. I'm going to do my best to zoom in here, where we have Gerald Genta on the rotor, and we have a Gerald Genta reference number. This is the GG7722 on the movement, and you can see the GG logo on the back of the case. And you can see the case, too, has octagonal facets on its reverse side. We have a beaded onyx-capped screw-down crown, and then if you look carefully, you'll recognize the Girard-Perregaux 3300. A lot of changes have been wrought. Gerald Genta called this the old gold or Potter gold treatment. The movement's a unidirectional winder with 42 hours of power reserve in this application. My favorite features are the bevels, which are particularly beautiful when you get close. And then we also have a triple solarization on the ratchet wheel, which is just gorgeous, and then an unconventional use of perlage engine turning on the bridges and the rotor rather rather than just the base plate. So it's an autologerie, automatic movement. It does have hacking seconds, even though it doesn't have a seconds display. On the dial side, it is a bi-retro, as the name implies. We've got retrograding date, retrograding minutes, and jumping hours. So you screw out the crown, you pull out the crown, and then you can play with your retrograde to impress your friends. Now, let's say you just want to jump the hour, but you want to preserve the position of the minute hand. There's a little jumper on the side that can be used for that. The dial is an example of champ-levé, so they actually drill out and machine little recesses in the dial. Then they fill it with several layers of lacquer, alternately black and clear, polishing each one. So you wind up with lacquer flush with these Art Deco-like grills. And it is a wonderfully animated watch. Remember, I said this is a watch that blurs the boundary between a watch and a gadget. And I think it's important to remember that gadgets are always fun, whereas watches can sometimes be stuffy. This gives you all the fun of a gadget, but with the horological value of an autologerie module, a heavily modified base, a great historic name in Gerald Genta, and unlike a lot of lapsed independents, this one can still be sent back to the modern-day Bulgari factory for service, parts, even new straps. Reach out to, of course, Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com, though, if you want to own this one, because these are scarce, rarely seen, few were made, and although just about all luxury watches survive in the long term, these are very uncommon outside of Asia and Europe. So if you're in North America or Latin America, this is a great opportunity to get into one of these. But let's say you have less money. Well, the good news is Habring of Austria has an option for you. This is the Irvin stainless steel jumping second. The model itself has been around since 2016, but this variant has a lovely hand-lacquered white dial. The case is just over 38 millimeters in diameter. It's quite slim at about 10.6 millimeters and only about 45.5 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip. It's vintage-inspired, which is why we have a relatively narrow case band, an unsigned crown, squared-off lugs, and strap tool holes in the lugs. Again, this is a vintage vision of a luxury watch from Richard and Maria Habring of Austria. Now, they only built a few dozen of any given variation per year, and you can see that because there's an edition number between the lugs right there, and it says 57. The dial is hand-lacquered with lovely blue Brigade-style Arabic numerals. It is a jumping second, a complication with which Habring has been familiar since 2007. It does have hacking or stop seconds. There's a wonderful nubuck type leather on the strap, and it's a seamless strap, so it's bonded together rather than stitched to give it a wonderful clean look. And you can see this is a brand new Habring factory strap. Turning it all over, this is the caliber A11S. You can recognize the drivetrain. If you've ever taken the automatic and chronograph bridges off a 7750, you know this is sort of what lies beneath. So all the parts, to the extent possible, short of small things like stones and shock protection springs, they are made by Habring or they are sourced from suppliers in Austria. Now, the watch has a manual 1 48-hour power reserve. You can see the deadbeat second system, a brilliant simplification of the age-old doctor's complication by watchmaker and founding partner Richard Habring. We have satination circular. We have engine turning. We have both black polished and blued screws. You can see we even have gilded screws on this reverse side and a lovely gilded bridge for the escapement lever. This is a wonderful watch because it gets you into the realm of independent horology, high horology, complicated watchmaking, and exclusivity, all with a rising brand that's been around for decades and stood the test of time. So this is a fascinating watch because a man could wear it, a woman could wear it, it would look good on any wrist, and it would be the crowning glory of any collection. If you need to add an elegant entry, you don't need an 1815 from Longo or a Calatrava from Patek. This is just as cool and far less common. But let's say you love German watchmaking and you do want to stick with your independence. Well, let's say we're going to stick with the language, but cross the border from Austria into Germany proper, state of Saxony, East Germany, Glasuta, an old watchmaking, glass blowing, and silversmithing town. Nomos Glasuta is known for accessible luxury watches, a rarity in the world of independent brands, but this, launched in 2015, is the deep blue variant. It is the Lambda white gold deep blue. Now, the Lambda came out alongside the Lux in 2013, and those are the flagship pieces from Nomos, the most capability, finish, and yes, the most expensive. So 42 millimeters in white gold, this blue dial lacquered version came out in 2015. This is deep blue, and though it's lacquered, it's a matte finish rather than a gloss. Super minimal. You can see the dial is printed, no appliques, and then only needle-like hands. You can see there is a power reserve indicator that gains pride of place at 12 o'clock, and it really dominates the top half of the dial. Manual wind, 84-hour power reserve. The case is large at over 51 millimeters lug to lug. However, it's under 10 millimeters thick, so it's nice and slim. Throw it on the wrist. I think you need a 15 centimeter circumference wrist or larger to wear this. It is super flat, but it is broad. It's a watch that has a lot of presence without being pretentious, and that's something Nomos does well at all price points. Now, when you flip it over, you realize this is the only Nomos built like a Langa. So you can see that the ratchet wheel is double solarized, and if you look carefully, you can even see that not only is the balance cock freehand engraved, but there's a message on there. It appears to say, "Made with love in Glasuta." Beautifully hand done. You can see that the swan's neck, as well as the curb pin outcropping, black polished. We have both black polished and fire blued screws here, 2 barrels for a nice even torque release, so you don't get a big balance amplitude drop off after 24, 36, 48 hours. 2 barrels is great, and underneath a 3/4 style bridge, just like a vintage German pocket watch. Also to that end, we have jewels set in golden chaton, a nod to the era when jewels would be set in precision chaton, which would then be pressed into the bridges because direct pressing into bridges wasn't possible for much of the 19th century. You'll also appreciate the Côte de Soleil. I need a German term for that, but it's a sunburst radiating out from the crown wheel across the bridges, and this is real hand-finished mirrored anglage, both on the balance cock and on the edge of the 3/4 style bridge. Plus, this is the Deutsche Uhrenwerk 1001. DUW means that when you see that on a Nomos movement, it's not just in-house, it's their own balance, hairspring, and escapement. An impressive run for a small company that was only founded in the 1990s. So they're making every part of this luxury watch. Again, you don't need to get a Calatrava, a Patrimony, or a Longa 1. You can get something fine from the independent realm that is extraordinarily uncommon and rare beauty. Just step over to the Nomos side of the family. Still keep it in Glasuta, but much less common than anything from Longa or Glasuta Original. The Lambda is rare. The Lambda Deep Blue is rarer than rare. Oh yeah, Shell Cordovan Horween strap, which I think is cool, and it's a factory piece. Now, I often talk about under-recognized value in the industry, and basically that's just me saying, get off of Instagram and judge watches on merit. Well, Brigade is one of the best companies for high horology and horological arts today. And a lot of people are cynical about this. They say, oh, it's a shadow of what Brigade once was. But I think it's unfair to judge a brand based on whether or not the founder's still alive or involved. It's been a long time since a Patek or a Philippe has made any watches in Geneva. It's been a long time since a Jaeger or a Lecoultre crafted any watches out of Le Sentier. And Brigade makes things that are just as nice, if not more so. This is the Tradition GMT. So it's the Tradition GMT from the La Tradition family that debuted in 2005. This model, 40 millimeters in rose gold, came out in 2012. You've got a secondary time zone with a day-night indicator, and look at the attention to detail. They inverted the color of the screws based on which half of the day or night, is being indicated. Now you have that secondary display. You have a primary dial that's made of solid gold, cut on a rose lathe. The guilloche is rendered, then it's silvered. The hands are steel Brigade style, fired blue, and you know, of course, it's a wonderfully crisp, almost column wheel-like feel to the actuation of the local hour adjustment. And then, of course, if I want, I can adjust all of the time zones in sync. Now, this is designed in the image of Brigade pocket watches made during the era of the master's actual life. So that's why we have the formal style, the Brigade hands, the guilloche dial. It's why we have a gear train that starts with a barrel in the center, and then we have these pocket watch style wheels with these flared splayed spokes. And so that is very much as you would have seen on Brigade pocket watches. Now we also have Brigade's signature shock protection innovation, parachute. You have this enormous cantilevered steel spring, which works as well as Kif or Incablock. It's just cooler and historically relevant. We also have an unusual element And Brigade was a real innovator, not Brigade the man, Brigade the company, today's Brigade, in the use of an overcoil with silicon construction. They first proposed this back in 2005. This is how it works. Deep reactive ion etching, which creates silicon parts, can be very precise, but it likes to work in one plane. And an overcoil, by definition, snakes up over the center to better center the mass of the hairspring for better positional timing and less deviation. But it's very difficult to have that three-dimensional structure rising up over a silicon hairspring. So Brigade came up with a solution. Make the hairspring in two pieces, and then use a delicate clamp to attach them together so you get the thermal consistency through hot and cold. With silicon, you get the anti-magnetic qualities of silicon, but you get to continue the legacy of Brigade with the overcoil, its centered mass, and improved timekeeping. Brilliant stuff. You can also see that a very modern, high-inertia balance is used with aerodynamic recessed bolts, so it's free-sprung for durability, and it is adjusted in a superior 6 positions, not the chronometer standard of 5. What at first looks like it might be a little bit rustic is actually quite beautifully finished. There is a power reserve indicator on the back, and so I will wind the watch a little bit so you can see that in action. But the power reserve is 50 hours, so you just need to flip your watch over to note approximately how much runtime you have left. The nickel anthracite coating of the bridges and plates is primarily on a sort of frosted finish, but if you turn it, you can see that the anglage is as bright as anything from Patek. We also have the same treatment rendered on every jewel and screw countersink. It is beautifully handmade, right down to the welded on lugs and the cold rolled and hand finished coining. And while it looks quite large, remember it's just 40 millimeters, so it's quite wearable. Throw it on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and I think you could get away with a 15 centimeter wrist here. It's definitely bigger than the original 727, but it's not a big watch. Plus you get a lot of complication and an awesome architecture. Architecture is the shaping, the proportioning, the relative arrangement of elements. Finishing is how they're decorated. Brigade, maybe more than anyone but Grubel Forsey in the industry, masters both in equal measure. Okay, now for something silly. This is the MBNF HM5 horological machine number 5 on the road again, inspired by the Amida Digitrend and the Girard-Perregaux casquette of the 1970s, which, in addition to being digital displays in a sort of roboticized tonneau profile, were interpreted as driver's-style watches during the golden era of Can-Am Canadian-American road racing series action. Now, in the era, it was also quite popular to design fastback cars with louvers. And you can see here, we have louvers that perform two things. Well, basically 3 roles. One, they look cool. This is like the back end of a Lamborghini Miura, the Alfa Romeo Caribou Concept, the original Giugiaro Volkswagen Scirocco, and his own design for the DeLorean DMC-12. So you get that, and of course you get the cool tumble home. You have these 2 little vents that look like exhausts on the back of the car. They're actually drains for water that may seep into the first case of the watch. There's a water-resistant inner case in titanium. The outer case is rose gold and zirconium, and this edition in rose gold was a 66-piece limited edition. So by opening the louvers, you allow water to drain out, you allow light to move in and activate the luminescent discs that represent the time. And again, it just looks really, really cool. Now, taking a quick look, you can see that the complication is built on a Girard-Perregaux base, very similar to what we saw on the Bulgari Gerald Genta before, albeit with the addition of MBNF's signature battle axe rotor. And then again, the bridges are really quite beautiful, as you can see. Now, okay, the complication. It was designed by Jean-Francois Maujon of Chronode for MBNF. He is one of the friends of Max Buser. It has a scrolling minutes display, and then it has a true jumping hour display. There is some luminescence, not a lot. I'll show you just so you can see it, but it's not explosively loomed, but it is there. I'll do my best to jump here. Now, the reason you open the louvers is because you allow the discs, which actually sit flush, to get charged up. So the discs actually, they sit in a flat plane, horizontal, and then there is a lens that bends the image vertical so you can read it. And the idea here, and I'll show you how this works, as a driver's watch, when your hand is on the wheel, you're looking straight at the display. So that's how that works. That's why it's called a driver's watch. Again, inspired by the casquette, the Amida Digitrend, the racing cars of Can-Am, and many cool fastbacks with louvers from the 1970s. So this watch is substantial, but it's only approximately 46.9 millimeters from lug to lug, so it wears fairly well across the wrist in spite of being very big. Parmigiani Fleurier. Awesome brand, fully integrated manufacturer, often idiosyncratic. The designs are not always universally pleasing. Fortunately, in 2020, Parmigiani brought in Dino Modolo, an ace freelance designer best known for designing, I should say co-designing, the original 1996 Vacheron Overseas, and he took elements of Parmigiani's Tonda case and toric bezel and fused them into this, the Tondagraf GT, a 42mm stainless steel annual calendar chronograph that is also 100 meters water resistant. We'll throw it on my wrist. You can see the way it fits. It's got a beautifully integrated bracelet. Now, the Parmigiani family of companies make dials, cases, bracelets, clasps, and movements, and all of that goes into this watch. It's not excessively thick, and you can see that there's plenty of clearance on each side, so I could wear this on a wrist as small as 15 centimeters circumference. It has it's not really a clou de Paris. They describe this as triangulaire, the guilloche on the dial. And yes, you heard me right. It is an annual calendar. It's very similar to a Richard Mille RM11 because it uses almost the exact same Vaucher automatic base as the RM11, and then almost exactly the same Dubois de Praz annual calendar chronograph module on top. So we have a double-digit date with a quick set. The month is indicated on a little register that also contains the constant seconds. There's a quick set for the calendar, and then there's hacking seconds to set the time precisely. It's a lovely watch with a screw-down crown, quite secure against water, with a beautifully decorated twin-barrel, free-sprung caliber PF0, I believe it's the 043 movement inside. So it's a very cool piece, and again, a 200-piece limited edition with a combination of black, orange, and steel. Ulysse Nardin. I think it's inevitable that I will create a Ulysse Nardin collection of my own. Too many watches from the brand that I love. Well, in 2018, for the 2019 model year, UN resolved to make its signature watch, the Freak, more accessible, not by dumbing down the movement, but by dispensing with gold and platinum. Historically, few Freaks had ever been made in a base metal, or basically anything other than platinum or gold. Well, for 2019, this Freakout model line was launched all in principally titanium. And what we have here is the Freakout Full Black. 45 millimeters in DLC blackened titanium. It doesn't wear that way. My impression was that it was a 42 when I picked it up, and being made of very light materials, that's how it wears. It's fairly thin at only 13.8, which shocked me when I measured it, and you can see a 16 centimeter circumference wrist can wear this quite well. Now, with all Freaks, since the very first, I should say, other than the very first, there is a little lock that locks and unlocks the bezel. The bezel is used to set the watch. So the minute hand is the baguette movement at center, and then the hour hand is just below that. There's a sapphire on which the individual hour numerals are radially arrayed, and surprisingly, the watch is actually quite well loomed. You can see it. Museum watch style, no indices, but you know the relative position of the hour and minute hands. Now, we also have a lot of proprietary watchmaking here. Free-sprung balance, and a full balance bridge for shock tolerance. It is a manual one with a 7-day power reserve, more on that in a moment. But we have UN's own silicon hairspring and UN's own full silicon double direct impulse escapement. Two wheels that lock and unlock alternately, impulsing the balance only in its direction of travel. So the spring does the work of reversing the balance rather than some sort of a Swiss lever accomplishing the same. This improves precision, power reserve, and reduces maintenance needs as this whole thing operates without lubrication. You can see that the movement is one and the same as the baguette profile of the minute hand. That's basically the whole thing with the exception of the enormous mainspring that you see on the reverse side. Now, you wind the watch by turning the case back. This is a system more or less proposed by Carol Forestier-Casapi, later famous as a director of watchmaking at Cartier, but she had this idea in the late 90s for a watch that had an enormous central mainspring. Combine that with Pierre Gigax's engineering and Ludwig Oxland's visionary time-telling layout, and you have the three godfathers and godmothers of the Freak, and I guess the crazy uncle would be Rolf Schneider because he okayed the whole thing with his own money. But a very cool watch. It's no less Freak than any. It's not like the Freak X with its automatic winding and its crown setting. This is still a Freak through and through, just without the expense of precious metal. This watch is not a freak, but it is freakish. This is the 2019 25-piece limited edition Heuer UR111C Black Cobra. That might be the coolest name for a watch in history, but it lives up to that billing. Inspired by the 1959 Louis Coutier and Gilbert Albert designed Patek Philippe 3414, better known as the Cobra. This watch is also a development of Heuer's own 2009 URCC1 Cobra, a $300 watch that was itself an homage to the 1959 original, which you can see in the Patek Philippe Museum. But this watch was the second year UR111C. The first year was 50 pieces. The second year was 25. The 25 all black DLC coating on a steel case. The watch has a winding system. On the top, there's a roller. You just turn it and it winds the watch. Then there is a fiber optic conduit that magnifies the two flush and intermeshing double-digit seconds displays. We have two wheels that mesh together. You read right there. We have an hour display, which is visible in a scrolling barrel at far left. We have a minutes display with a retrograding helical marker, and then alongside that we have a scrolling minutes display. So this watch has hours, minutes, and seconds. It is a regulator. Because of the way the retrograde works, it is also a retrograde. So let's take a look at this right here. So when you pull the locking lever out, it hacks the zenith movement inside, so that's stop seconds, and it turns the winding roller into a setting mechanism. This little helix bears a bright strand that jumps. It's a little spring that jumps from the end back to the beginning, and there's an internal spring that draws it out and then releases it. So you can quite easily read the time. You can see right now it is 4:25. If you can't read it here, you can easily read it here. You can see that the hour, unlike the minutes and the seconds, the hour is a true jumping mechanism. It is not a scrolling hour. Take a look right there. You can see the jumping hour off to the side. And it's got a rock-solid base using a Zenith Elite. Again, this is a 25-piece limited edition. The Elite automatic winds internally. It's got a 48-hour power reserve. It's both very accurate and very tough. The watch, surprisingly, is luminescent. I'm going to do my best to show you that here. But it is a luminescent watch. It's a little bit difficult to get the camera to pick up anything in the dark, but you can see the mechanism operating, and it is visually spectacular. You just want to make sure that everything's charged up before you show off to your friends. This is a very cool piece. I'm going to show it to you on my wrist. It's actually a lot easier to wear than you might think because the pivot centers of the lugs are fairly far in. Plus, you can actually adjust the relative angle of the lug at the far end of the case. That can actually be released, readjusted, and locked in place, so you can mitigate against the fit issues. You can see it actually doesn't overlap the edges of my wrist. I'll zoom out a little bit so you have a better sense of perspective here. But this is a watch that really looks good, feels good, wears well on a medium-sized wrist. Again, my wrist is 16 centimeters. It's also a driver's style watch, retrograde regulator, and yeah, it's a jump hour that you can read while you're driving your car. Finally, and I didn't know what the last watch would be today because I usually try to save it for a big piece. This is one of the first ever Moritz Grossman watches we've received here at Watchbox. This is the Bennu Power Reserve 41 millimeters in white gold. And you can see it has a solid sterling silver dial and a lovely nickel anthracite matte. They make their own hands, and they make them exquisitely, cutting them and then manually finish them. They insert something called high ceram, which is a white ceramic material, and then everything is polished down so the ceramic and the steel are flush and indistinguishable. We have a power reserve indicator, manual wind, 42 hours of power reserve, and possibly the world's smartest setting system. So when you pull the crown out, you actually stop the movement. It activates hacking seconds, but the crown snaps right back in. Now the watch is in a setting mode, and if you look at the reverse of the watch, you can see that the balance has stopped. So I can set the watch, but I don't have the same risk that often presents itself when you push a crown back in after setting. When you push the crown back in, you almost always displace the minute hand. So you set it precisely, and then you ruin all your hard work. Here, the crown snaps right back in after you put it in setting mode. When you want it to return to timekeeping, you just press this spring-loaded return, and the watch jumps back into action. No need to replace the crown. It's already in. Turning it all over, the movement is theirs, and not just theirs, but uniquely theirs. They make their own balance. They shape their own overcoil hairspring from Nivarox. They make the tiny parts. They even fire their own screws, and you can see a lot is different here. It's like a Longa with more soul, as Longa is going to make 5,000 to 6,000 watches a year, whereas Moritz Grossman is going to make 200 to 400, and you can do things better when you do it slower. Look at the freehand engraving on the escape wheel cock and the balance cock. Not only is there more of it, but it's more intricate than the patterns you find on Langas. Look at the micrometric adjustment system right here. That's their own. They craft that in-house. Look at the triple solarized ratchet wheel. And take note, we have both black polished and fired violet brown screws here. Look closely. I'll do my best to show you this. It's a hard thing to see, but the teeth of these wheels are all internally beveled at the micro level. Excruciating difficulty, time-consuming, not something you would bother doing if you were making even 900 watches a year like FP Journe. Take note, all of the screws have chamfered slots and circumference. The violet-hued jewels are fired briefly. If you fire something for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, it turns blue, you can leave it cooking, nothing changes. But a shorter firing duration is necessary to achieve violet. You can also see that they wanted a more modern, pale look to their watches, so they used clear sapphires, or corundum, rather than synthetic rubies, and that right down to the capstone of the balance. They make their own balance. Take a look at this enormous, slow-beating, recessed bolt, variable inertia balance. You've got an overcoil, you've got a huge balance that's almost the radius of the movement, and then you have enormous stripes. Take a look at how broad they are. They're laid down with a large abrasive wheel, and then all of the gradient is beautifully preserved. You can see light on one side, dark on the other. You'll also appreciate that everything that's engraved on the bridges, the numbers, the characters, the letters, the statement of branding and origin, it's all freehand engraved. It's not machined or laser etched or stamped. It is freehand engraved. Plus, we have mile-wide bevels on the edge of the bridges, and the bridges have a lovely pale golden German silver alloy that's very common in modern German watchmaking, but also historically. It is an homage to the past, along with the three-quarter architecture of the primary bridge. Everything about this watch exhausts superlatives, except the size. It's a very wearable watch. 41 millimeters gives it a good presence, but not an overbearing presence. And you can see that on my wrist right here. It's also very thin, easily sliding underneath the cuff. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. And if you think you might be in New York on the 23rd, that's next week, email me. If I've got a slot, you're in. Time out, Tim out. Have a great weekend, and thanks for logging on.